Star Wars presents itself as a saga about hope, heroism, and redemption. Yet when you examine its relationships closely, a darker pattern emerges, one where love is repeatedly introduced, intensified, and then systematically destroyed by the very structures meant to protect the galaxy. This is not coincidence, nor is it simply a preference for tragedy. Star Wars is a story about systems that grind individuals down, and love is the first casualty because love requires stability, honesty, and time, three things the galaxy almost never allows. Every failed romance is not just a personal tragedy, it is evidence of an environment fundamentally hostile to emotional continuity. The most infamous example is the relationship between Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala, a romance that did not collapse because affection faded, but because the Jedi Order forced love into secrecy and shame from the very beginning. Anakin was never taught how to love responsibly, communicate fear, or integrate intimacy into a balanced life. He was taught that love was dangerous, forbidden, and disqualifying. That framing did not eliminate love, it distorted it. Padme became Anakin's sole emotional anchor, not his equal partner, and when fear entered the relationship, there was no external support system to absorb it. Love did not fail here. The conditions required for healthy love were never allowed to exist. Secrecy transformed devotion into pressure. Every shared moment carried the weight of exposure. Every disagreement risked catastrophic loss. Instead of being a space for mutual growth, the relationship became an emotional bottleneck where all of Anakin's fear, hope, and desperation converged. Padme was not just someone he loved, she was the only place he was allowed to feel. That is not romance, it is emotional captivity produced by institutional repression. When the relationship finally imploded, it was not because love turned toxic on its own, but because the galaxy had trained it to be. The tragedy of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Satine Kryze cuts differently, because here love is not forbidden in secret, but sacrificed openly on the altar of ideology. Obi-Wan chose the Jedi, Satine chose pacifist governance. Both choices were framed as noble, responsible, and selfless. Yet neither produced peace. Obi-Wan became emotionally restrained and internally isolated, a man who learned to carry loss quietly and alone. Satine governed a system too idealistic and fragile to survive sustained violence. Their love was not destroyed by betrayal or fear, but by loyalty to institutions that demanded sacrifice without offering care in return. What makes their failure so devastating is that it exposes a recurring Star Wars truth. Choosing the system over love does not save the system. It only ensures personal loss, alongside institutional collapse. Obi-Wan did everything the Order asked of him, and still watched it fall. Satine upheld pacifism with absolute conviction, and still died violently. Their romance was not incompatible with goodness. It was incompatible with a galaxy that demands ideological purity at the cost of human connection. Han Solo and Leia Organa present an even harsher indictment, because unlike most Star Wars romances, theirs was not forbidden. It was allowed, celebrated, and narratively endorsed. And yet it still collapsed. This matters because it proves that even when love is permitted, the galaxy still refuses to protect it. Years of warfare, leadership pressure, and unresolved trauma eroded their relationship until affection was no longer enough to bridge the damage. The loss of their son was not the beginning of the end. It was the breaking point in a system that never allowed healing to occur beforehand. Their relationship did not die from lack of love. It died from accumulated trauma with no space for recovery. Star Wars is relentless in this way. Battles end, wars conclude. But emotional aftermath is rarely addressed. Characters are expected to endure, not process. Han and Leia were never given time to be anything other than symbols of resistance and leadership. Love cannot survive indefinitely when it is always postponed in favour of duty. The connection between Rey and Ben Solo fails for a different reason, because it is born not from shared stability, but from shared loneliness. Their bond is intense, immediate, and deeply personal, yet it is not grounded in mutual growth. Rey sees redemption and meaning. Ben sees escape and absolution. They are not moving toward the same future. They are reaching toward each other from incompatible wounds. Star Wars repeatedly reinforces that broken people are not allowed to become whole together. Healing, when it occurs, must be solitary or fatal. Their romance does not fail because love is absent. It fails because the narrative refuses to let intimacy coexist with unresolved power, guilt, and destiny. Ben cannot be redeemed and loved simultaneously. Rey cannot build a future with someone still defined by violence. The galaxy demands resolution through sacrifice, not continuity through care. Once again, love is permitted only up to the point where it would demand a future. Kanan Jarrus and Hera Syndulla come closest to disproving this pattern. Because their relationship is functional, communicative, and emotionally grounded. And Star Wars still kills it. This is not accidental. Their love does not fail emotionally, it fails narratively. The galaxy demands sacrifice, and lasting love is treated as incompatible with heroism. Kanan's death is not the result of dysfunction, it is the price paid for allowing love to exist at all within the story. This is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Love that is secret becomes obsessive. Love that is ideological becomes sacrificial. Love that is permitted becomes eroded. Love that is healthy becomes fatal. The galaxy does not merely challenge romance, it systematically removes the conditions required for it to endure. That pattern tells us something profound about Star Wars itself. The pattern becomes unmistakable once you step back and stop treating each failed romance as an isolated tragedy. Because Star Wars does not merely depict love struggling under pressure, it depicts a galaxy structurally designed to kill it. Love is not framed as evil, but it is framed as incompatible with the forces that actually drive history in this universe. War, prophecy, power, and institutions that demand sacrifice without offering care. The moment love begins to require continuity, protection, or prioritization, the narrative removes it. Not out of cruelty, but because stable love would fundamentally disrupt the kind of story Star Wars is built to tell. This is why Cassian Andor and Jyn Erso are only allowed intimacy at the moment of death. Their connection is real, grounded, and earned, but it is permitted only when it no longer threatens the future of the story. The instant love might demand a life beyond the mission, the narrative ends it. Star Wars allows affection as a farewell, not as a foundation. Love is acceptable when it has no future, because a future would require the galaxy to slow down, to heal, and to value individual continuity over mythic sacrifice. That is not an accident, it is philosophy. Star Wars repeatedly equates forward momentum with conflict, and conflict requires disposability. Love creates roots. Roots slow wars. Roots demand rebuilding instead of escalation. A galaxy built on endless cycles of collapse cannot tolerate too many roots without undermining its own logic. So love is allowed to burn brightly, but briefly, contained within moments that inspire sacrifice rather than demand preservation. The quiet counterexample of Bail Organa and Breha Organa proves this rule by violating it in a very specific way. Their marriage survives because it exists outside the mythic centre of the saga. They are important politically, but not narratively central to destiny, prophecy, or the Force. Their love is stable precisely because it is not used as fuel for the myth. The more a romance is tied to galactic fate, chosen ones, or symbolic power, the more likely it is to be destroyed. Stability is permitted only when it remains narratively unimportant. This brings us directly to the Jedi Order, which structurally forbids attachment, not because love is dangerous, but because love resists control. Intimacy creates competing loyalties. It demands transparency. It prioritizes individual well-being over institutional continuity. By treating attachment as a flaw, the Order guaranteed that any Jedi romance would either be secret, suppressed, or tragic. This was not a safeguard against darkness, it was a factory for emotional fragility. Love denied does not disappear. It mutates, becoming obsession, fear, or desperation. Every Jedi romance that collapses is less a personal failure and more an institutional one, produced by rules that confuse emotional absence with balance. Star Wars also consistently frames power and love as mutually exclusive. If you hold great power, your intimacy must suffer. Jedi, Sith, monarchs, generals, chosen ones. The greater the power, the narrower the emotional space. Love is portrayed as something that weakens authority rather than humanizes it. This framing is deeply pessimistic because it assumes leadership requires emotional isolation. Characters are forced to choose between influence and intimacy, and when they try to hold both, the narrative punishes them. This is why even relationships that begin with mutual respect and affection are eventually ground down by role expectation. Love requires vulnerability. Power demands performance. Star Wars consistently prioritizes the latter. Characters are allowed to love only until that love begins to interfere with what the galaxy needs them to represent. Once love becomes something that might redirect destiny, it is removed. The Force itself is not neutral in this equation. It binds characters to fate, vision, and cosmic consequence, all of which compete directly with the needs of relationships. Love exists in the present. The Force drags people toward futures they did not choose. When characters are pulled between prophecy and partnership, prophecy always wins, because Star Wars is ultimately a myth about destiny overriding personal desire. Love is allowed to inspire sacrifice, but not to redirect fate. This is why Star Wars romances feel doomed even when they are sincere. The galaxy is not designed to sustain emotional stability. There are no extended periods of peace, no institutional support for healing, no cultural prioritization of recovery after trauma. Wars end only to be replaced by new ones. Systems collapse only to be rebuilt in similar forms. In that environment, love does not fail because people stop caring. It fails because there is never time to become whole together. And this is the final, quiet truth beneath all these broken relationships. Star Wars is not a story about love conquering all. It is a story about systems that destroy people before people can save each other. Love is allowed to exist as motivation, as tragedy, as inspiration, but never as infrastructure. It can spark rebellion. It can justify sacrifice. It can redeem individuals at the moment of death. But it cannot be allowed to last because lasting love would require a galaxy willing to pause, repair, and choose care over conflict. That is why every Star Wars romance fails. Not because love is flawed, weak, or naive, but because the galaxy is hostile to emotional continuity by design. The tragedy is not that people cannot hold on to each other. The tragedy is that the universe they live in never gives them a chance to try.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.